What happens when one of the most carefully managed public figures in the world sits down for what she thinks will be a friendly chat, only to find herself facing questions she never agreed to answer? What happens when a host, known for her warm demeanor, decides that today the gloves are coming off? This is the story of an interview that started with smiles and ended with one of the most shocking moments in British television history. Before we get into what actually went down in that studio, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think about all of this, because trust me, you're going to have opinions by the end of this video. The morning started like any other at the ITV studios in London. Meghan Markle had arrived early, her team in tow, everyone moving with the kind of precision that comes from years of managing public appearances. She was there to promote her latest venture, a lifestyle brand that she had been working on for months. The plan was simple: talk about the brand, share some personal anecdotes about motherhood and family life, keep things light and positive. That was the agreement. That was what had been discussed in the pre-interview meetings, the carefully negotiated boundaries that her team had laid out weeks in advance. Lorraine Kelly had hosted thousands of interviews over her decades-long career. She had built her reputation on being warm, approachable, the kind of person who made her guests feel comfortable enough to open up naturally. But those who knew her well, those who had worked with her for years, also knew something else. Lorraine had a keen sense for when someone was performing rather than being genuine, and she had very little patience for it. The studio was set up in its usual fashion. 2 chairs angled toward each other, a small table between them with glasses of water, soft lighting designed to make everyone look their best. The audience had been seated, a mix of dedicated fans who had queued for hours and regular viewers who had won tickets through various competitions. There was an energy in the room, that particular buzz that comes when people know they are about to witness something special, though none of them could have predicted just how special it would turn out to be. Meghan walked onto the set at exactly 9:23 in the morning. She was wearing a cream-colored outfit, tailored perfectly, her hair styled in loose waves. She smiled at the audience, gave a small wave, and took her seat across from Lorraine. The cameras were rolling, the crew was in position, everything was ready. Lorraine started exactly as expected, warm and welcoming. "So lovely to have you here," she said, her Scottish accent carrying that familiar, friendly tone. "You look absolutely wonderful. How are you doing?" Meghan smiled, the kind of smile she had perfected over years in the spotlight. "I am doing really well. Thank you so much for having me. It is always lovely to be here and to have the chance to connect with everyone now. You are here to talk about your new brand," Lorraine continued, "and I have to say, from what I have seen so far, it looks absolutely beautiful. Tell us a bit about what inspired this." Meghan leaned forward slightly, her hands folded in her lap. "Well, I have always been passionate about creating spaces and products that bring people together. This brand is really about celebrating the everyday moments, the small joys that we sometimes overlook in our busy lives. It is about quality, sustainability, and making people feel good about the choices they make." "That sounds wonderful," Lorraine said, nodding along. "And I know you have put a lot of yourself into this. It must be exciting to finally share it with the world." "It really is," Meghan replied. "It has been a labor of love, and I am just so grateful to be able to do this work." The first few minutes continued in this vein. Pleasant questions about the products, about Meghan's vision for the brand, about the creative process. Meghan answered each question with practiced ease, hitting all the talking points her team had prepared. The audience seemed engaged, nodding along, some of them taking photos despite the no-phone policy, but then something shifted. It was subtle at first, just a slight change in Lorraine's tone. A different quality to her smile. Lorraine said, setting down the card she had been holding. "I think what people really connect with is authenticity. And I have to say, watching you talk about this, I am curious. Do you actually use these products yourself, or is this more of a business venture?" There was a brief pause. Meghan's smile did not falter, but something flickered in her eyes. "Of course I use them," she said. "Everything in this collection is something I genuinely love and believe in." Lorraine nodded slowly. "Right. Because I think sometimes people can be a bit skeptical, when celebrities put their name on things. They wonder if it is really about passion, or if it is just another revenue stream." Meghan shifted slightly in her chair. "I completely understand that skepticism, And that is exactly why I have been so hands-on with every aspect of this. This is not just my name on a product. This is me putting my values out into the world." "Your values," Lorraine repeated. "That is interesting, because I think a lot of people are curious about what your values actually are these days. You have spoken a lot about privacy, about wanting to live a quiet life. But then you are also very much in the public eye, doing interviews, launching brands. How do you reconcile those two things?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Meghan's publicist, standing just off camera, tensed visibly. This was not part of the agreed-upon topics. "I think there is a difference between choosing when and how to engage with the public and having your privacy invaded," Meghan said, her voice measured. "I have never said I wanted to disappear completely. I have said I wanted control over my own narrative." "Control over your narrative," Lorraine said, leaning back in her chair. "That is a phrase you use quite a lot. But I wonder, when you talk about controlling your narrative, does that include being selective about which truths you tell?" "I am sorry," Meghan said, her smile now visibly strained. "I am not sure I understand what you are asking." "Well," Lorraine continued, her tone still friendly, but with an edge that had not been there before. "You have given several interviews over the years where you have talked about your experiences, your struggles, but there have also been reports, statements from other people who were there for those same events, and their accounts sometimes differ quite significantly from yours. So I am just curious, when you talk about your truth, do you ever consider that there might be other truths, other perspectives that are equally valid?" The audience had gone completely silent. This was not the Lorraine Kelly they were used to seeing. This was something different, something sharper. Meghan took a sip of water, clearly buying herself a moment to think. "I think everyone is entitled to their own perspective," she said carefully. "But I can only speak to my own experience, what I lived through, what I felt." "Of course," Lorraine said, nodding. "But experience and fact are not always the same thing, are they? You can feel something very strongly, but that does not necessarily make it objectively true. And when you have a platform as large as yours, when you make claims that affect other people's reputations, do not you think there is a responsibility to be accurate, not just emotional?" Meghan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I have always been truthful about my experiences." "Have you, though?" Lorraine asked, and now there was no mistaking the challenge in her voice. Meghan straightened in her chair, her media training kicking into overdrive. "I think we should get back to talking about what I am actually here to discuss, which is my brand and the work I am doing." Lorraine smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "Of course, we will get back to that. But you see, this is exactly what I find fascinating. You come on shows like this, you want to talk about products and projects. But you have built your entire public profile on personal revelations, on sharing your struggles and your pain. You cannot have it both ways, can you? You cannot use your personal story to build sympathy and support when it suits you, and then shut down questions about that same story when they become uncomfortable." The publicist took a step forward, but the floor manager held up a hand, shaking his head. They were live. There was nothing to be done now except let it play out. "I have never shut down legitimate questions," Meghan said, her voice tighter now. "But there is a difference between legitimate questions and an interrogation. Is that what this feels like to you?" Lorraine asked, tilting her head. "An interrogation? I am just asking you to clarify some things that a lot of people find confusing. For instance, you have talked extensively about how difficult your time in the UK was, how isolated you felt, how there was no support. But there are people who worked in that household, people who were there every day, who say that simply was not true. They say there were multiple instances where help was offered, where resources were made available, and that you either declined or your team declined on your behalf. So which is it?" Meghan's hands gripped the arms of her chair. "I think those people have their own reasons for saying what they are saying. And what reasons would those be?" Lorraine pressed. "Are you suggesting they are lying? Because that is quite an accusation to make about multiple people who have nothing to gain from speaking out." "I am not accusing anyone of anything," Meghan said, her voice rising slightly. "I am simply saying that my experience was my experience, and no one can tell me that what I went through was not real." "But what did you go through exactly?" Lorraine asked, leaning forward now. "You have been very eloquent about your feelings, about how things made you feel. But you have been remarkably vague about actual events. You spoke about concerns regarding your son's skin color, But you would not say who expressed those concerns. You talked about being denied help for your mental health. But you did not provide details about when you asked, who you asked, what specifically was said. Do you not think people deserve more than just feelings? Do you not think if you are going to make serious allegations, you should be prepared to back them up with facts? The audience was completely transfixed. Some people were nodding along with Lorraine's questions. Others looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Everyone was watching Meghan, waiting to see how she would respond. I protected people by not naming them, Meghan said, and there was an edge to her voice now. I could have been much more specific, but I chose not to be because I did not want to cause more damage. How convenient, Lorraine said, and the words hung in the air like a slap. You get to make vague accusations that cast suspicion on an entire institution, an entire family, but you do not have to provide evidence because you are being protective. That is a very safe position to take, is it not? You get all the sympathy without any of the accountability. Meghan stood up abruptly, then seemed to think better of it and sat back down. This was not what was agreed to, she said, looking directly at Lorraine. We had an agreement about what would be discussed. Agreements are not contracts, Lorraine replied calmly. And even if they were, I have never believed that journalists should allow themselves to be told what they can and cannot ask. If you only want to answer approved questions, you should stick to releasing written statements. The moment you sit down for a live interview, you accept that the conversation might go in directions you did not anticipate. This is ambush journalism, Meghan said, and there was genuine anger in her voice. Now, this is exactly the kind of thing I left the UK to get away from. Because from where I sit, I am just asking you direct questions about statements you have made publicly. If that feels like an ambush, maybe you should ask yourself why. Maybe it is because you are not used to being challenged, not used to having someone push back when your narrative does not quite add up. My narrative? Meghan repeated and she laughed, but there was no humor in it. You keep using that word like I am making things up, like I am some sort of fantasist. I never said you were making things up, Lorraine said, but I do think you have a tendency to reshape events to fit a particular story. A story where you are always the victim, always the one who has been wronged, and everyone else is either against you or failing you. And I think after years of watching this pattern repeat, people are starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the common denominator in all your conflicts is you. The gasps from the audience were audible now. This had crossed from tough questioning into something else entirely. Meghan's face had gone pale, then flushed red. You do not know me, Meghan said, her voice shaking slightly. You do not know what I have been through, what I have survived. You are right, I do not know you, Lorraine agreed. None of us do, not really. And that is the problem, is it not? You have given us this carefully curated version of yourself, this image of a brave woman fighting against impossible odds, but anytime someone tries to look deeper, anytime someone asks for specifics or points out inconsistencies, you shut down and claim you are being attacked. That is not transparency. That is not honesty. That is public relations. Meghan was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was ice cold. I came here in good faith to talk about my work, to talk about something positive I am trying to bring into the world. Instead, you have used this platform to attack me, to try to humiliate me on live television. Have I attacked you? Lorraine asked, and her tone was genuinely curious now. I have asked you questions. Direct questions? Yes. Uncomfortable questions, perhaps. But is asking questions the same as attacking? Or have you just become so accustomed to people treating you with kid gloves that any form of scrutiny feels like assault? This is not scrutiny, Meghan shot back. This is cruelty disguised as journalism. Cruelty, Lorraine repeated softly. You want to talk about cruelty? What about the people whose reputations you have damaged with your vague implications? What about the family members you have estranged, the father you have not spoken to in years? What about the staff members who left their positions, some of whom filed complaints, and who you dismissed as liars or people with an agenda? Where is your concern for the cruelty they might have experienced? Those situations are complicated, Meghan said. You do not know the full story. Then tell us, Lorraine said simply. Tell us the full story. Right now, you have the platform, you have the audience. If we do not know the full story, whose fault is that? Meghan stared at Lorraine, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. The silence stretched out. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. The audience did not move. The cameras kept rolling. Finally, Meghan spoke, and her voice was quiet but firm. "I do not owe you or anyone else a detailed account of my private family matters, just because you think you are entitled to them. But you have already made them public," Lorraine countered. "You sat down for a globally televised interview and discussed these very matters. You wrote about them, spoke about them, built an entire advocacy platform, partly on the back of them. So forgive me, but I think once you have opened that door, you cannot be surprised when people want to walk through it. There is a difference between sharing my experience on my own terms and being interrogated like I am on trial," Meghan said. "You are treating me like I am some kind of criminal. I am treating you like an adult who should be able to defend her own statements," Lorraine replied. "If you cannot do that, if you cannot answer basic questions about things you yourself have said publicly, then perhaps you should not be making those statements in the first place." Meghan looked toward her publicist, who was now speaking urgently into a phone. She looked back at Lorraine, and something in her expression had changed. The Polish was cracking. "Or maybe you should not be allowed to host a show if you are going to use it to bully your guests," she said, and her voice had an edge that had not been there before. Lorraine repeated, and she actually laughed. "That is rich, coming from someone who has been accused by multiple former staff members of bullying behavior. In fact, was there not an investigation into that? Whatever happened with that? The results were never made public, were they? Very convenient. That investigation was a calculated smear campaign," Meghan said, her words coming faster now. "It was designed to discredit me at a time when I was speaking out about the treatment I received. The timing was not coincidental. So everyone is against you," Lorraine said, spreading her hands. "The institution, the media, former staff members, family members who speak to the press. Everyone is lying or has an agenda except you. Do you honestly not see how that sounds? Do you not see how paranoid and self-centered that perspective is?" "It is not paranoid when it is actually happening," Meghan said. "You are proving my point right now. This is exactly what I have been talking about. The British media has never given me a fair chance. From the moment I came into this country, I was treated differently, covered differently, judged by a different standard." "Because you are different," Lorraine said bluntly. "You came from outside, you had a career before, you had opinions, and you were not afraid to share them. Yes, that made you different from what people were used to. But different does not automatically mean wronged. And I think you have conflated legitimate criticism with persecution to the point where you cannot tell the difference anymore." "Legitimate criticism," Meghan repeated, and she shook her head. "Is it legitimate criticism when newspapers run negative stories about me doing the exact same things other members of the family do? But when they do it, it is praised? Is it legitimate when I am called demanding for asking that a statement be corrected, but when others do the same thing, they are just setting the record straight?" "You are talking about specific incidents," Lorraine said. "Give me one. Give me a concrete example of identical behavior being treated differently, with evidence. Not just your feeling that it happened." "There are dozens of examples," Meghan said. "People have done entire comparative analyses showing the different headlines, the different language used. Then it should be easy for you to cite one right now." "One clear example." "I am listening." Meghan opened her mouth, then closed it. The example she was thinking of, she could not quite remember the details clearly enough to state it definitively, and she knew Lorraine would pounce on any imprecision. "I am not going to sit here and do your research for you," she finally said. "If you genuinely cared about the truth, you would have looked into this yourself." "I have looked into it," Lorraine said, "and what I have found is that yes, you received negative coverage. But much of it was in response to specific actions or decisions that people disagreed with. That is not racism or persecution. That is just how public life works. People have opinions. Some of those opinions are negative. That does not make them bigots." "You are diminishing what I experienced," Meghan said, and there was real pain in her voice now. "You are sitting here, as a white woman, telling me that what I experienced as a woman of color was not real, was not racism, was just normal criticism. You do not get to make that determination. And you do not get to make every criticism about race," Lorraine shot back. "That is what you do, is it not? Anytime someone disagrees with you, anytime someone criticizes your behavior or your choices, you play the race card. It is your shield against accountability. And it is incredibly cynical. The audience was divided now, some people nodding vigorously at Lorraine's words, others looking shocked and uncomfortable. Meghan's publicist had moved closer to the set, clearly ready to intervene if necessary. "Playing the race card," Meghan said slowly, "that is what you think I am doing. That is really what you believe." "I think you use your identity strategically," Lorraine said. "I think you understand that it makes people uncomfortable to push back against you because they are afraid of being labeled racist, and I think you exploit that discomfort." Meghan stood up, and this time she did not sit back down. "I am done," she said simply. "We still have 12 minutes left," Lorraine said, glancing at the monitor. "I do not care," Meghan replied. "I am not sitting here listening to this anymore. This is disgusting. This is exactly the kind of toxic behavior that made me leave in the first place. So you are walking out," Lorraine said, and there was something almost satisfied in her voice. "You are proving my point. The moment things get difficult, the moment someone refuses to just accept your version of events without question, you leave. You did it with your family. You did it with your country. And now you are doing it here." Meghan had already unclipped her microphone. Her publicist was at her side now, speaking in low, urgent tones. "No, what I am doing is refusing to participate in my own destruction," Meghan said, her voice shaking. "You invited me here under false pretenses. You ambushed me with hostile questions. And now you are trying to make it seem like I am the problem because I will not sit here and take your abuse. It is not abuse to ask you to explain yourself," Lorraine said, still seated, still calm. "It is not abuse to point out contradictions or to push back against narratives that do not hold up under scrutiny. But I understand why you would frame it that way. It is easier to claim victimhood than to actually defend your actions." "You know what?" Meghan said, turning back to face Lorraine fully, her voice rising now. "Maybe you are right. Maybe I should have been more specific. Maybe I should have named names and provided dates and times and a full dossier of evidence. But I was trying to protect people. I was trying to do the right thing, even when it cost me, and this is what I get for it. This is what I get for trying to take the high road." "The high road," Lorraine said, and there was genuine incredulity in her voice now. "You call doing interview after interview, writing books, doing documentaries, the high road. You call constantly referring to your pain and your struggles without ever taking responsibility for your own part in any conflict, the high road? If this is your version of taking the high road, I would hate to see what you consider to be the low one." "I have taken responsibility," Meghan said, her hands gesturing emphatically now. "I have said multiple times that I am not perfect, that I made mistakes. Saying you are not perfect is not the same as actually identifying what you did wrong," Lorraine interrupted. "It is just another way of sounding humble without actually being accountable. What specific mistakes did you make? What could you have done differently? When have you ever said, 'I should not have done that. I was wrong about that. I owe that person an apology'?" Meghan was silent, her jaw clenched tight. The publicist was pulling at her arm now, trying to guide her off the set. But Meghan seemed rooted to the spot, staring at Lorraine with an expression that was equal parts fury and something that looked almost like hurt. "This is what you wanted, is it not?" Meghan finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, but picked up perfectly by the studio microphones. "This is the show you wanted to create. The big confrontation. The moment where you take down Meghan Markle. You must be so proud of yourself." "I wanted an honest conversation," Lorraine said, and for the first time there was something like weariness in her voice. "I wanted to have a real discussion with you, not a promotional appearance where I lobbed softball questions and you delivered prepared answers. I wanted to give you the chance to actually address the questions that so many people have. But you could not do it. You cannot do it, because honesty would require admitting that maybe, just maybe, you are not the perpetual victim you have made yourself out to be. So there you have it. One interview, two very different perspectives on how it should have gone, and an ending that nobody could have predicted. What do you think about all of this? Was Lorraine out of line with her questioning? Or was she just doing what journalists are supposed to do and holding someone accountable?